Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Vonnie Quinn with your top stories. Markets melting down in Asia with Korea's Kospi crashing by the most since 2008. European futures pointing to further losses. Oil extending gains despite the US promising naval escorts in the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump threatens to cut off all trade with Spain after it denies the US access to military bases for the war in Iran. The US president also ramping up criticism of the UK over the use of British air bases. Chancellor Rachel Reeves tells us military decisions won't be based on the prospects for future trade deals. We'll bring you our exclusive interview. So once again, today's market action all being led by oil. As you can see, we're back on an upswing for Brent crude, back above $83 a barrel. New York crude at 75. Natural gas futures also higher in Europe today, and the knock-on effect to Henry Hub. Now, you might have thought that since we saw a little bit of calm in the market yesterday, that calm would last through to today. But analysts are now coming out and saying, look, it's not quite so fast that we're going to get this all done, despite what the president says. Halima Croft, for example, of RBC Capital Markets, saying this is really more the concepts of a plan phase. And Bob McNally of Rapidan saying this is going to take weeks. Halina pointing out that there doesn't seem to be any coordination with the reinsurers or the insurers, so we'll see how the mechanism works. But right now, S&P futures are lower, though not as low as we've seen them in previous days. The 10-year yield also showing just a little bit of calm. We're back down to 407.09, but that's still far from where we were this time last week. And the Bloomberg Dollar Index continues to strengthen. President Trump says the U.S. will provide insurance guarantees and rival naval escorts for oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. A short time ago, Iranian security officials are reported to have said they now have complete control of the waterway. Meanwhile, attacks on Iran continue to escalate, with the Israeli military appearing to have attacked Iran's assembly of experts, the clerical body tasked with choosing the next supreme leader. Tehran has also continued to strike parts of the region, including a reported drone attack on a CIA station in Saudi Arabia, as well as the U.S. consulate in the UAE. Donald Trump has expressed concern that the strikes against Iran could eventually lead to a new leadership that's equally troubling to Washington. Stock markets in Korea have been hit by a wave of panic selling, with trading halted on the Kospi earlier after stocks plunged as much as 12%. Let's get an update from Winnie Su now in Hong Kong. We're almost erased all our gains for the year, Winnie, it seems.
Yeah, exactly, Vonnie. As you mentioned, we are seeing a lot of panic selling when it comes to the South Korean market. And in fact, we are looking at a volatility spiking up to the highest since 2008. And analysts are saying that a lot of these margin calls are actually accelerating that downward momentum when it comes to the sell-off. And here you can see that Kospi down about more than 10%, a similar fall off when it comes to the Kosdaq index. And these are leading these benchmarks to head for its biggest two-day decline since 2008. And in fact, also entered a technical correction level. Leading losses, you can see, are these AI darlings, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. And in fact, they were down about 15% each already yesterday. So really seeing a bit of a sell-off when it comes to these stocks that have been that top performers on the AI demand. Now, flip the board and take a look at the broader market when it comes to how Asia is trading. We can see that MXAP here down more than 4%, its worst day since April. Similar losses we're seeing in Japan and Taiwan. However, when it comes to Thailand, actually down about 8% and triggered that trading halt earlier today. When it comes to Hang Seng Index, down about 3%, also entered technical correction, with the onshore CSI 300 benchmark erased all gains so far this year ahead of the MPC meeting. Nifty, the India benchmark, also down about 2%, coming back after a holiday. We're also watching rupee that's actually at its record low. Now flip the board and take a look at where oil is trading. As you mentioned, extending gains, and that is really hurting the overall Asian equities because we are the net importer of oil, and Asian stocks also under that pressure from a stronger dollar. But when it comes to the slightly bright side of things, you are also looking at the energy stocks rising a little bit, lifted by the higher energy cost. Back to you, Vani.
Winnie Su in Hong Kong, thank you so much. And I just want to break the fact that Dubai stocks have fallen 4.7% as trading resumes across the Emirates. In Abu Dhabi, we're seeing stocks lower there by 2.4%. So once again, a drop after we reopened across the Emirates for trading. Dubai stocks down 4.7% at that open, and Abu Dhabi down 2.4%. U.S. futures dropping too. Inflation fears lingering despite President Trump saying the U.S. will escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. Let's bring in Mark Cranfield, cross-asset strategist at Bloomberg Live. Mark, U.S. stocks did seem to be resilient in the Tuesday session. They closed well off their lows of the day. How will they respond to Asia's sell-off today?
It looks like it's going to be very difficult for the U.S. stocks to avoid the kind of feed across that we've seen in Asia. As Winnie was describing there, it's a complete sea of red across the Asian region today. Nobody has been immune from the sell-off, with Korea right at the front of it. And if a couple of the names she mentioned there, Samsung and SK Hynix, very big losses today. And they're just part of that AI story, which of course has also helped US equities as well. So when American traders come in later today and they see clearly what's been happening in Asia, especially in Korea, it's going to be pretty hard for them to come in with a positive attitude. And probably when they look at their own tech companies, that change in valuations that is going through the markets in Asia will probably have a feedback, and a negative feedback, into the American market. It's all very well for President Trump to say that tankers could be escorted through the Straits of Hormuz, but we have a report on Bloomberg saying that establishing the insurance policies for that is going to be very difficult. It's going to take quite a long time. So it isn't something that traders are expecting to happen very quickly. If it happens at all, there's going to be a delay. In the meantime, as you were saying, oil prices have gone higher again today in Asian trading. So all in all, it's a pretty ugly picture for American markets, for them to withstand what they see. And they've still got the European markets to get through as well. We may get another sell-off there. We've got weakness in the euro currency. The dollar is still doing its best to pound all the currencies around the world. So by the time we get to New York trading today, the picture could be just as bad. All the headwinds in place. To see an upward move for American markets today looks pretty unlikely.
And of course, we're subject to headline risk all day long as well. Mark, thank you so much. Mark Cranfield, cross-asset strategist at Bloomberg Live. As Mark was saying, oil extending gains this morning despite the U.S. promising naval escorts in the Strait of Hormuz. Reports say Iran is now claiming to have, quote, complete control of the waterway, and that it's warned global shipping networks not to sail through it. Bloomberg's Jumana Bersachi is in Dubai. So, Jumana, the economic consequences of the Iran war growing rapidly now.
Yep, and President Trump is taking note. Very interesting announcement from the president yesterday saying that the U.S. are looking to provide naval escorts and to lower insurance costs for any vessels and tankers looking to pass through the Strait. And as we've been talking about, the Strait has effectively been closed because tankers, vessels are opting not to use it over concerns over safety and also cost as well. Just to give you an idea of costs, Vani, back on Friday, if you wanted to hire a super tanker that would deliver your oil to China, it would have cost you around $200,000. Those rates are now being quoted closer to $500,000. So it's double-fold here. One is security, and the other element to consider is cost as well. President Trump saying that they're introducing these measures, but there's a bit of skepticism in the market as to how it's going to be implemented and whether actually any companies are going to subscribe to it. As you just said, Iran is still saying that they have full control of the Strait of Hormuz. So the reaction in energy markets is quite muted to that. But I will say the attacks and the intensity of attacks, the joint operations between U.S. and Israel continue on Iranian targets. CENTCOM saying that they've hit over 2,000 targets in Iran. This is just from the U.S. side of things. Israel IDF yesterday targeting the building that houses the Assembly of Experts. That's what they're known as. This is a group of clerics who will be meeting to decide who's going to be the successor to the supreme leader. And so the attacks on key personnel, on infrastructure, on military infrastructure, on missile launchers continue. And in retaliation, we are seeing the intensity also of the Iranian attacks on some of these Gulf states diminish in scale, but however, still being very focused on some of the U.S. assets around the region. Overnight, the Dubai consulate was targeted, in addition to the CIA headquarters in one of the facilities of the CIA, I should say, in Saudi Arabia.
You mentioned the attack on Iran's Assembly of Experts, the clerical body choosing the next supreme leader, different accounts of what actually happened there or the outcome. But when might we expect a new supreme leader to be named, Jumana? Do we have any updates, or what's the consensus?
Yeah, it's unclear at this point. It's also unclear exactly how much damage was sustained from that strike on the building of the Assembly of Experts, and whether there actually were any fatalities that were caused on the back of it. But ultimately, there are lots of reports flying around about who potentially could succeed the Ayatollah, whether it would be the grandson of the founder of the Islamic Republic, whether it would be the son of the former supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Those are some of the names that are being thrown into the mix. But I think what is interesting is President Trump once again, and this was in an interview with Politico last night, floated the possibility of having discussions or being willing to speak to a new type of Iranian leader, especially if they seem to be more amenable to the U.S. position and some of the U.S. The demands that they're asking on behalf of the nuclear discussions that have been taking place. So there does appear to be some willingness or openness from the U.S. administration to speak to a potentially new leader. At this point, we don't know who it is, but as we've spoken about in the past, there's Ali Larijani, who effectively is making some of the major military and intelligence decisions right now. And they still seem to be going after U.S. assets dotted all around the Gulf, which has significantly raised the ante of what could happen next.
All right, Jumana, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Jumana Bercecci. Meantime, we are looking at Washington and Friedrich Merz's trip to meet the U.S. president. And also, of course, problems with the Spanish prime minister after the president took offense that Spain wouldn't allow the U.S. use its air bases for Iranian strikes. So we're going to talk about all of that in just a moment. But first, want to take a look at how oil is trading now and give you an update on that situation. We are seeing it higher once again today. That's after a little bit of a relief rally when President Trump said that there would be an escort for ships through the Strait of Hormuz. So, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is due to make a statement at 8 o'clock this morning, UK time, after US President Donald Trump said he will cut off all trade with Spain. The threat comes after Spain denied US access to their air bases for Iranian strikes.
I told Scott to cut off all dealings with Spain. They were the only country that in NATO would not agree to go up to 5%. I don't think they would have agreed to go up to anything. They wanted to keep it at 2%, and they don't pay the 2%. So we're going to cut off all trade with Spain. We don't want anything to do with Spain.
I'm joined now by Bloomberg's Chief Europe correspondent, Oliver Crook. So, Ollie, after all of this, where are we now with US-EU trade relations?
Yeah, I mean, everything gets so sort of muddled up with every geopolitical twist and turn that you get from the United States. You now have this threat from the President of the United States to basically cut off all trade relations with Spain, which, of course, would complicate the broader trade situation with the rest of the Europeans, which is one of the main priorities that Chancellor Merz had when he was in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, that press conference, what you couldn't see in that shot is sitting right next to the President of the United States was the Chancellor of Germany, who basically got very few questions from the press. Everything was completely dominated by the question of Iran. And for Friedrich Merz, who arrived in Washington, D.C., he really wanted two things. He wanted to get clarity on the U.S. tariff policy, what the framework was going forward, how on earth the Europeans are going to continue to move forward with ratifying their trade deal with the United States, and of course trying to get into the president's head and understanding on the question of Ukraine and what the next moves for the United States are in terms of trying to further the peace agreement with the Ukrainians. Of course, what ended up dominating the conversation was the question of Iran. Here is the Chancellor of Germany sitting next to the President of the United States and his view on the situation with Iran. Have a listen.
This is, of course, damaging our economies. This is true for the oil prices, and this is true for the gas prices as well. So that's the reason why we all hope that this war will come to an end as soon as possible, and we are hoping that the Israeli and the American army are doing the right things to bring this to an end and to have really a new government in place who is coming back to peace and freedom.
Yeah. Something had to be done, and it's been 47 years.
So a conversation between these two leaders that was really hijacked by the question in Iran for the Chancellor of Germany now heading back to Germany and really sort of trying to brief the Europeans in the conversations he had with Donald Trump probably did not make the kind of advances that we'd like to see on the question of trade, on the question of Ukraine. And we should say that the Germans have been a lot more hedged in dealing with the question of Donald Trump, particularly on Iran, much more supportive of the president, though obviously still intensely uncomfortable with some of the developments we've seen over the last 48 or 72 hours.
Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you for that update. Our chief correspondent, Oliver Crook. Coming up, we'll be speaking with Thomas Schulz, CEO of industrial service provider Bilfinger, to talk earnings. That's next. This is Bloomberg. You Bilfinger earnings because sales did see a slight beat in the quarter. The dividend also higher than the estimates. Dividend of €2.80 per share. The estimate was for a dividend to be paid out of $2.60 per share. Margins-wise, 2026, Bilfinger is looking at 5.8 to 6.2%. And then also adjusted EBITDA, also a beat. Joining us now, Thomas Schulz, CEO of Bilfinger. So congratulations on what must have been a difficult quarter, Thomas. I'm curious. Now that we're seeing this conflict in the Middle East, you obviously have a lot of operations and a lot of contractors and so on in the Middle East. How is it affecting supply chains and just your business in general?
Good morning, Bonnie. At first, our business in the Middle East is only roughly 4% of the top line. So it's actually not that big. And for the people who follow us, they know that we have a very strong strategic focus with M&A, especially in that region, and we will not change our view on the Middle East. It's a growing market, and it will be a growing market. Most important of all is that all our people are safe, and that is what we could justify from Saturday morning Central European time on. In general, as you rightly said, we had a very successful year, and we look again for a sustainable, profitable year ahead of us.
You say you won't change your opinion on the Middle East when it comes to deals. It sounds like you might be looking at some potential deals to continue to grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a good time for us. We perform for 3-4 years now quite good. And we are strong enough to expand us. And as we said on the Capital Market Day, beginning of December last year, that we will have half of the growth, what we will realize, will come over M&A. And the Middle East is a focus area. And your question regarding supply chain and so on, we know that our customers have some impact on the negative side, but on the positive side too. We, as an industrial service provider, actually our transfer is mainly our knowledge, our people. And that actually works still quite well to the Middle East and from the Middle East to the outside world.
Can you give us any more details, Thomas, on the sectors you're looking at in terms of potential acquisitions, be it in the Middle East or elsewhere, and what other geographies are tempting right now after, your most recent acquisition?
Yeah, we look especially for companies in our core. That means industrial service providers, especially on the mechanical side. As you could see that we announced a signing short before Christmas with a larger company, colleagues in Turkey. So we expand from what we call Eastern Europe, Poland, Czech Republic, down to the Middle East. We see that as a very important area for the process industry in the years to come. And our setup there is just too small on the top line of the whole group. There we see quite a big potential.
Chemicals has been in a really prolonged lull. We were speaking with the CEO of BASF last week, and he's a little sanguine, a little optimistic, I would even say. What's your outlook for the sector? Do you anticipate a pickup perhaps this year?
It's a very good question. When we look into the heavy energy-based process industry, especially in the chemicals, this is a situation what we have now for several years, 3 years, 4 years. So the industry is already quite down in that part. On top of it, most, if not all, of our clients, especially in Germany, initiated quite a while ago efficiency improvement measurements in their own company, and we as Bilfinger contribute in that quite good too. So they get more reliable for the future and for the things to come. So if there is a slight optimism from the low level, what we achieved in the last few years, I would agree. The question is, of course, the timing.
Naturally. Also, signs of growth in Europe, Thomas. Where are you seeing those signs of growth? What industries are particularly doing well?
We see energy, we see pharmaceuticals, we see food, we see oil and gas actually on a slight growth path, pharma actually on a bigger growth path, chemical and petrochem more on a side movement. Overall, good potential for us as a service provider, what we call the outsourcing potential, that customers give us more responsibility, more of their maintenance operations directly fully in our hands, so that they can focus on that what is important for them, production of their products and their core business. We are very well positioned for that.
And finally, Thomas, about 20% of your business is in your own home country where you are now, in Germany. Obviously, it's experienced a little economic difficulty. What is the outlook for Germany?
Not only a little, but this is not new news. This is ongoing for quite a while. And we see that the new government, if you can say new since February, March last year, have all the right things on the table. Execution has to be the top priority. And not only for the government, for the industry, for the society too.
Yeah, Thomas, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. But again, congratulations on the quarter. Thomas Schulz, CEO of Bilfinger Group. Still ahead, France is to deploy an aircraft carrier to the Mediterranean as global energy prices spike. We'll bring you the latest. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Daybreak Europe. Look at this Kospi. We're down 12.25% now. We are close to our lows of the session. And that's 2 sessions now of huge declines. That's an almost 20% drop in just the last 2 sessions on the Kospi. This, of course, after the holiday Monday. I also want to point to S&P Future is going to be tough, as Mark Cranfield earlier said, for them to ignore what's been going on in Asia overnight and also what we'll see in Europe, which looks to be lower now, futures-wise. That said, will Donald Trump's idea that we can get something going in the Strait of Hormuz with reinsurance from the US and even escorts, will that help to calm markets further? The question is out for answer. The dollar index continues to strengthen against almost every single major currency. All right, coming up, we're going to discuss the widening global consequences of the Iran war. Ali Vaez from International Crisis Group is going to join us. Do stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your top stories. Markets melting down in Asia, with Korea's Kospi crashing by the most since 2008. European futures pointing to further losses. Oil extending gains despite the US promising naval escorts in the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump threatens to cut off all trade with Spain after it defies and denies the US access to military bases for the war in Iran. The US president also ramping up criticism of the UK over the use of British air bases. Chancellor Rachel Reeves tells us military decisions won't be based on the prospects for future trade deals. We'll bring you our exclusive interview. So let's get to these markets now, because even after the president promised efforts on reinsurance and even escorts through the Strait of Hormuz for ships that are stuck there, we are seeing oil rally once again today. We got that tiny little bit of relief yesterday after the president's comments. And then after the market took time to assess, we had comments from people like Halima Croft at RBC saying, look, this is more in the concepts of a planned stage. It's going to take weeks for this to actually get going. Plus the DFC, which is the mechanism through which this might work as maybe a reinsurer, hasn't been in touch with any of these large insurance companies. In fact, it's told them to call it. So it all seems just a little bit complex and a little bit difficult to resolve right now, and jitters back in the oil markets. This also as more and more facilities go offline or are damaged. We also have natural gas futures now. This is interesting. They have just turned a little bit lower. That's the Henry Hub signal. We obviously will see what happens in the Netherlands today. A serious gain over the last 2 days, though nothing like what we saw in Ukraine. Let's take a look at futures, because European futures, well, they had been pointed higher in some markets, but now just in general, oh, there we go, we're at flat. So basically deciding which way to take it today. The 10-year yield at 407.09, so those inflation jitters are still built into this market in a big way, and the dollar index is strengthening as well. Of course, those Asian currencies are really having a tough day today, but it's basically currencies across the world that are weaker against the dollar. Time now for your front page news, dominated, of course, by the Middle East. The Financial Times leads on Israel launching extensive strikes on Iran. This comes after Donald Trump said the U.S. military could begin escorting oil and gas tankers transiting the Gulf. The Wall Street Journal says Israel is blowing up Iran's police state to clear the way for a revolt. The paper saying the airstrikes have targeted organizations responsible for suppressing protests and cracking down on separatists, though analysts are skeptical the strategy will work. Finally, Les Echos leads on President Macron announcing reinforcement of the French military presence in the Middle East following the escalation in tensions in the region. And you can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DayBGo. Reports say Iran is now claiming to have, quote, complete control of the Strait of Hormuz, and that it's warned global shipping networks not to sail through it. This comes after President Trump said the U.S. will insure and escort tankers passing through the vital waterway. Bloomberg's Jumana Brisecci is in Dubai. Jumana, he can say it, but the market has to believe it, right? What's the latest?
Absolutely. Well, the latest, as you're showing on screen, is oil prices are still up another 2.5%. But most definitely what's happening here is not just President Trump, but global markets are taking note of some of the knock-on effects of the war in Iran that it's having on energy markets, supply chains, and so forth, and what that potentially could lead to higher inflation down the track, which is something that, of course, the U.S. president would like to avoid heading into the midterms. And so he announced yesterday that the U.S. will be providing insurance guarantees and naval escorts for tankers and vessels choosing to cross the Strait of Hormuz. Effectively, the strait has been grounded to a halt because none of these tankers are choosing to cross on safety concerns, but also on rising costs. But that being said, I think a lot of the experts are quite skeptical as to how quickly this plan from President Trump can be up and running, how it will be implemented, and whether actually companies will subscribe to it in the first place. But what we are seeing, though, is notable developments, particularly when it comes to oil. In the case of Iraq yesterday, for example, announcing that they were having to reduce the level of production because their storage capacity has reached full. Aramco, Saudi, looking at other ways of getting their oil out to their customers, possibly through the Red Sea. And so most definitely what you're seeing now is some rethinking going on as to how you can get oil out of the region in a way that avoids the Strait of Hormuz. And this is why that actually is surpassing the announcement by President Trump yesterday, because there is a real fear that we're going to see more tightening in this market. And actually, of note, this morning I've noticed the likes of Goldman Sachs have raised their forecast for oil by $10 this morning for 2026 on anticipation that we're going to continue to see disruption in the next couple of days. So very much the case that what is happening in this part of the world is beginning to have global reverberations on markets.
Absolutely. Jumana, thank you so much. That's Jumana Brisecci in Dubai. Let's bring in Ali Vaez now, Iran Project Director and Senior Advisor at International Crisis Group. Ali, just first on this whole oil situation and getting oil through the Strait of Hormuz, or at least getting these tankers to be able to, dock at port and offload their cargoes and maybe reload and get out of there, right? Is this the only leverage that Iran has, and is there a way to counter it? I mean, is the president on the right track countering it this way, or will it be successful?
It is one of the most important tools that Iran has to put pressure on the global economy and on President Trump to back out of this conflict. The reality is that what the president has offered, in fact, in a way, I think, plays into the hands of the Iranians, because they are also looking to increase the human cost of this war for the United States. And if American warships are in closer proximity to the Iranian borders so that they can better target them with short-range missiles and drones, in fact, that is something that I think the Iranians would welcome. So I don't think it's a solution.
Yeah, and in fact, Halima Croft of RBC was even questioning whether they have the actual, staff and ships to be able to do this, given that they're also involved in the war themselves. So let's get on to who might succeed the Supreme Leader, right? We seem to be getting closer, although that strike on headquarters yesterday where they were, apparently may or may not have been deciding who the next Supreme Leader would be. We don't know what the outcome of that strike was, Ali, but just assuming we will get a name in the coming days, who do you think it will be?
Look, it's very hard to say. There are lots of rumors that it might be Ayatollah Khamenei's son, Mujtaba, who was in his office and played an outsized role behind the scenes during his father's reign. But that would further, I think, delegitimize the system, even in the eyes of its own supporters, because it would become basically like a monarchy. Whereas this is a revolutionary system that toppled the monarchy in 1979. But there are also other names, like members of the three-member council who are currently assuming the responsibilities of the office of the leader. The head of the judiciary and a member of the Guardian Council are on that council and are potential candidates. And so are some other people like former President Rouhani or the grandson of the founder of the system, who are a little bit more moderate, therefore probably have a lower chance at this point. The main question is, if somebody is selected at this point, when the war is still ongoing, the Assembly of Experts will basically paint a target on their back.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ali, I mean, obviously there's a military strategy that's being carried out, right? So when we do get a new Supreme Leader name, does that military strategy change? Does it get more intense? Do we notice any difference?
No, that's not going to change, because the war effort is currently run not by the office of the Supreme Leader, but by two individuals, the National Security Advisor, Ali Larijani, and Speaker of Parliament, Ghalibaf. And they're going to remain in charge and continue the war effort regardless of who's going to be elected Supreme Leader. And that person is going to be pretty weak off the gate before he can consolidate power.
Ali, there seems to be speculation out there that there are efforts ongoing to try and, I guess, allow any resistors to, do an uprising if they so feel like. I mean, first of all, do you believe these reports that that's happening, that various, agencies, US and beyond, are actually helping in this regard? And second of all, will we see some kind of resistance?
Look, there's certainly going to be a lot of effort to try to create an uprising. The reality is that the Iranian people are very unlikely to come out as long as this war is ongoing. Yesterday, bombardments in Tehran were so intense, they almost amounted to carpet bombing. And under these circumstances, you cannot expect civilians to come out. And even when the war is over, depending on what remains of the regime, it might still have sufficient repressive capacity to keep unarmed, disorganized, leaderless protesters at bay. It is also possible that the U.S. might start arming some groups like Iranian minorities like Kurds or Baluchis, but that is more likely to result in civil strife than in any kind of transition to a Jeffersonian democracy.
Yeah. Ali, you've said a couple of times now that the new leadership will be weak, at least at the beginning. I mean, does that leave any openings for any kind of resistance, and not just maybe by the population, but inside the regime, you know, IRGC resistance or anything else?
No, because that's we have to make a distinction between the political leadership and the security forces. And the security forces have been planning for these kind of circumstances for a very long time. Iran has about 1 million men in arms just for internal security. And so that is going to be extremely difficult to dismantle unless the U.S. is willing to bomb Iran and flatten huge parts of the country at a very high civilian casualty cost for several weeks to come. And even then, the results might be uncertain. Regime change through the air is really, there's no historic precedent for it.
All right, Ali, thank you so much for the context today. That's Ali Vaez, Iran Project Director and Senior Advisor at International Crisis Group. Now to some other top geopolitical stories we're following this morning. The Canadian Prime Minister has described the war in Iran as another example of the failure of the international order. Speaking in Sydney, Mark Carney said he agrees that Iran should be prevented from obtaining nuclear weapons, but, quote, this is not a blank check for the US and Israel.
We support efforts to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security. We do, however, take this position with regret because the current conflict is another example of the failure of the international order.
France, meanwhile, is deploying an aircraft carrier to the Mediterranean in an attempt to secure shipping routes and ensure Europe's economic interests in the region. In an address to the nation, President Macron said air defences and a frigate are also being sent to Cyprus.
Nous avons des intérêts économiques à préserver.
We have economic interests to protect because oil and gas prices, as well as the international trade situation, are profoundly disrupted by this war. Faced with this unstable situation and the uncertainties of the coming days, I have ordered the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, its air assets, and its frigate escort to head toward the Mediterranean.
The US president has ramped up his criticism of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer after he refused permission for US forces to use British bases for the war in Iran. Speaking during an Oval Office meeting with the German Chancellor, Donald Trump said he was very disappointed.
I'm not happy with the UK either. That island that you read about, the lease, okay, he made it for whatever reason, he made a lease of the island. Somebody came and took it away from him. And it's taken 3-4 days for us to work out where we can land there. It would have been much more convenient landing there as opposed to flying many extra hours. So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
China has called on all sides of the Iran war to ensure the safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz as tanker traffic has effectively halted. As the world's largest oil and gas importer, China is among the most exposed nations, with almost half of its crude imports transitioning the strait in December. I'm joined now by Bloomberg's Minmin Lo in Beijing. So, Minmin, what impact could disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, which we are already seeing, cause for China?
It's going to be a huge impact, right? As you said, nearly half of its oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly about 30% of its LNG comes through the Strait of Hormuz as well. So this is the most direct call yet that China has made on Iran to protect the tankers passing through the strait. And we understand from senior gas executives that China has also been quietly behind the scenes, been calling on Iran to avoid attacking key export hubs like Qatar, for example. And one of the most immediate impact has been the entrenching the relations between China and Russia even further, because you think about how the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's first call to a foreign leader was not to the Iranian Foreign Minister, but it is to the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And of course, Russia can offer alternative sources of oil and gas to China, but it can be a cushion, not necessarily enough to replace the supply from the Middle East. And analysts are saying that if this disruption lasts for more than a month, China may be forced to buy from the largest LNG exporter in the world, and that is the U.S. It might then be in China's interest to roll back those tariffs that it has placed on U.S. LNG. Of course, this will be a win for President Trump, but for China, it will make them vulnerable to depend on the U.S. on such a strategic resource. And of course, LNG could be weaponized by both sides, especially ahead of this Trump-Xi summit that is supposed to take place at the end of the month.
Knock-on effects we never would have thought might happen. Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Min Lo, thank you so much. Here's something else we weren't expecting today. Kospi's down 12% at the close. That's the biggest ever intraday drop for the Kospi. The Kospi having its biggest ever daily drop, down 12% at the close. That brings its two-day decline now to around about 20%. This, of course, after that scorching rally. Nonetheless, the biggest drop on record for the Kospi in Korea. Coming up, Rachel Reeves says the UK won't make decisions about the war with Iran based on US trade ties. Bloomberg spoke exclusively with the UK Chancellor after she delivered the government's spring statement yesterday. We'll bring you some of her interview next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the UK won't make decisions about the war with Iran based on US trade ties. She sat down exclusively with Bloomberg after delivering her spring statement.
When it comes to decisions around using British armed forces to take part in conflicts around the world, it is very important that we judge those on whether it is legal and whether it is the right thing to do. You can't make a decision about whether to get British armed forces involved in a conflict because it may or may not make it more likely to get a trade deal. And we judged that there was not a legal basis for offensive action on Iran. But of course, once Iran responded, particularly...
Sorry, not a legal basis for the UK, but presumably not for the US either? If you're making a
we can only make
that.
judgments for ourselves, and that was the judgment that we came to based on our legal advice, and it's up to other countries to explain what action they've taken and on what basis. But once Iran responded in the way that they did, including with missiles being launched into our allies who are not involved in the offensive action, and the risks to our military bases in Cyprus, of course it was right that we became involved in defensive action, and we were involved in that from Saturday, and of course on Sunday we gave permission for US jets to use British assets from which to launch those defensive actions, and that's a decision that we've taken as a government.
UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves there speaking exclusively with Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders. Plenty more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
This is going to be really, really hard. And I just think market participants are dealing with an enormous amount of uncertainty.
Right now, it's just too soon to know what imprint this has on inflation and for how long.
Inevitably, the world that we're living in may change geopolitically. We may see realignment of alliances. Energy prices has a big impact. We may see inflation come back in.
Woke up or the market opened up down 1,100 points, and now it's come back. It speaks to the resiliency and robustness of the market.
Some of our guests at Bloomberg Invest in New York reacting to the war in the Middle East. Take a look at this chart because this is going to provide context going into today's trading session. You saw the president come out and give some shipping guarantees, right? Or at least, as Halima Croft says, the contents of a plan for shipping guarantees. So talking about perhaps insuring ships going through the strait and also maybe escorting them. Now, At first glance, the market was very becalmed, right? We saw risk just come right back on. We'll see how this progresses, because for the rest of the session, there was a little creep higher when it comes to yields once again on inflation risk, and a little creep higher in oil. And once again this morning, we're seeing oil rising again too, as the market thinks, well, how long will this actually take? And is it even doable? The DFC, the mechanism through which it would work, well, they are not reaching out to anybody. They've told people to reach out to them. So will the reinsurers go for it? Will the insurers go for it? It remains to be seen. Now, a little bit of pandemonium across Asia in the session. Korea had its worst day ever in stocks. So the Kospi down 12% at the close. It was the biggest loss on record for that index, and it brings its two-day decline now to almost 20% after that blistering rally. Still up 20% year to date. Nevertheless, this is a sign that maybe things are getting a little bit disorderly. Another sign that things are getting disorderly is that we've had intervention in Indonesia and in India from their central banks because of currency moves. Intervention already today. Let's take a look at some other markets. So you have the set in Thailand down 8%. The HSI, Hang Seng Index, down 2.6%, a little bit more orderly there. And the Nifty in India down 1.9%, but that's after currency intervention. So we're going to keep an eye on markets today and how they react to the Asian session overnight. Of course, stocks in the Emirates also opened up today after a couple of days of closures, down about 4.5%, 5% in Dubai and more than 2%, 3% in Abu Dhabi. Your risk events for the day then, 8 a.m. UK time. The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez will speak and presumably react to President Trump's remarks. 7 p.m. UK time, we get the US Beige Book. And, of course, after the US close, we get Broadcom earnings. Fed Governor Stephen Miron on surveillance at 1:30 London time. You won't want to miss that. But, of course, we have many, many hours to get through before all of these risk events come onto our radar. And, indeed, could be a difficult trading day once again. Do stay with us. The opening trade is going to take you through the next couple of hours. This is Bloomberg.